Hello and welcome to episode two, not eight, two of Two Guys Talking Sales. I'm one of your hosts, Kevin.
And I'm Sean.
We're glad you're here on episode two of Two Guys Talking Sales. In this podcast, we tackle real sales issues, big and small, for salespeople, selling situations, and sales leadership. We've individually built successful sales careers around the problems and solutions used in B2B selling. From software and services to manufacturing and distribution, we have sold to and for many of the world's most recognized brands, as well as some you haven't heard of. We know LinkedIn says this is a 30-minute time slot, but we're only going to take 15 minutes. Nothing like under promising and over delivering. So, for roughly the next 15 minutes, we invite you into our world of experience where we'll take on an issue. If I get untongue tied, we'll take on the issue and dig into one so you'll have a solution should you encounter a similar situation in your career. Let's dive in. Sean, let's set the stage.
I think this topic should be all about how do you set your sales plan objectives for this year?
Setting objectives for the year, like not being tongue-tied on a public broadcast. How about that? That'd be a good objective.
At least you tried to plan ahead and had it written out. That's better than I did. I'm just winging it. So,
Our last episode was all about planning your year. Why not have a plan? Well, so you'll know how you're doing, right?
there you go. There you go. There you go.
So for today, we're going to talk about how to determine company sales objectives. Yes, let's do that.
Great. So I'm going to start off. Let me talk a little bit about what I would advise somebody if you were asking me how to do that. I would say, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I know that the objective is what are you going to be this year, but you need to start working backwards a little bit, in my opinion. So let's talk about 5 years. Where do you want to be? And how is this year going to be the first step in that 5-year plan so we can go backwards? So let's just not say, well, I want to do 10% better than last year, because that's not a plan for getting somewhere. That's a plan from getting away from where you were, right? Last year you were at X amount of revenue, 10% more. Sure, that sounds great, but does that get you where you want to be, right? So I think that's the first step of the process.
Completely agree. And one of my favorite sales leadership stories is I was working with the company and I had a group of about 7 sales folks, and we're at the annual planning retreat. And one guy this was a new practice for them. So he was not bad. He was just new at this practice. He says, I want to grow this product line by 20%. I said, great. 20% is a big growth. I like that. What was last year's number? And he went, and I realized this was a key learning point for me, that not everybody knows their numbers, right? And this now that was kind of an egregious kind of example, but it was real. That actually happened in my life. But for somebody who's never done any forecasting and planning, setting reasonable goals, determining company goals can be somewhat of a daunting experience, right? It can be tough to set a sales goal. And for the people who, you and I work for some really big companies, we've been in charge of some big quotas, some big dollars, lots of people to reach those. So missing those dollars can be kind of a big downer culturally, right? So how do you walk that line between I've never done this before and I've done this, and if I get it wrong, it's really, really high stakes kind of quotation. So what's been your experience?
Yeah. So, I've worked for public companies. I've worked for private companies. I've worked for companies that wanted to become public. So I've kind of done the whole thing. A lot of times where are we going to go for our sales objectives should be written by the CFO. If you have that in your organization, definitely your leadership of your company, because it is really where do we need to be as a company to support what we're going to go forward. And then the next step is, okay, sales people, sales organization, sales team, your number has to probably be somewhat larger than what that company goal is. So if the company, let's just pick on a $10 million company, if that CEO says, well, I want to go from $10 million to $12 million, so that's a 20% growth, that 20% that you were talking about. But that would mean that my sales people, I would want them shooting for 12.5, 13, right? Because I need to make sure we get there. So we need to have the plans in place to get to at least 12. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future. So I have a CEO. I'd be like going, okay, let's shoot a little bit high and let's figure it out from there. But let's drive it from where the company has to be, not just what we think the salespeople can generate. Because now, once we have selected the number, now the VP of sales, director of sales, they need to start figuring out what kind of organization do I need to have in order to achieve that objective for the company, right? So I really do think it has to be top down to what that number needs to be, not, gee, I've got 4 salespeople. I know they can only do 800K a piece. So that's therefore it's, we're going to do $3.2 million and that's all the better we're going to do. That's not really driving the organization forward.
Right. And it's interesting. So now's where we get into some of that psychology of sales. And, on both sides of the fence, you're going to have one person who says, never overassign quota, right? And for those of you who don't know what overassigning quota is you've got a $10 million quota, which we're talking about going to 12 million, and then you assign out $15 million to individuals to get to the 10 or $12 million, right? We don't want to do that. That's a bad practice, right? But what we also don't want to do is say, well, we need 12 million. Let's hit 12 million on the nose, right? Because then you've got a scenario where everything in your world has to go perfectly just to hit the minimum goal.
Yep.
Right.
So you know what's worse? Not assigning enough quota to the salespeople to hit the number that you want to hit, because then you get a bunch of salespeople that made all their numbers, right? They made their number. You could have every single one of them making their number, but the company didn't make its number, right? So look, the company needs to come first in this scenario. So a slight overage, probably not a terrible thing. I definitely wouldn't say if my goal is to hit 12 million, let's give out $15 million worth of quota. That's probably too much. But 12.5, yeah, that's probably not too bad, right? So maybe even 13 at the high level is probably not too bad of giving out quotas. I don't know. What do you think about that, Kevin?
Yes, and a lot of that will come down to the average ticket size. There's some, nuances by industry. So let your conscience be your guide, but base it on data. Like make a data-driven decision, not just a gut decision. And if you're in a high growth mode, not only do you have to figure out how do you grow sales wise, but how do you support that growth, right? So if you're not planning or budgeting for a operational support for customer success, delivery, stock, inventory investment, if you're a goods distributor, you've got growth as a cash event. So, determining sales objectives, you can actually run out of money while growing wildly. Right. So as a leader, it is incumbent upon you to plan and think through this. In our last episode, we talked about why analyze your sales department. This is a glaring reason because you can actually sell yourself into a really tight cash situation.
Yeah. And we talked earlier this year, you and I did a CEO workshop on supply chain issues and working through a crisis, which is what we really had at the beginning of the year. We still have a little bit of that even now where supply chains are kind of screwed up. So that's got to factor into what your goals are for your company. You have to be realistic. If you're having a hard time getting product or you have to overpay to get raw goods if you're a manufacturer, then you got to factor that into what you need to say for your quota for your company and for your individual sales teams.
Completely agree. So let's back this train up a little bit and let's talk about some initial best practices. I'm guessing that some of our listeners haven't done a ton of sales planning or goal setting, and others are very seasoned at it. But let's talk about some of those fundamental best practices. And in my mind, edit my thought here, but in my mind, we've got a do more of, meaning do more of this behavior with these customers, grow a customer, stop calling on customers that aren't giving you any return, right? Or do more of, start doing something new. So you got to start, stop, and do more of kind of approach. So when you're thinking about that framework in selling, it allows you to, at the base level, really just basically, we're just, guarding the perimeter, base level, determining a building block for a goal setting exercise.
Exactly. I think the easiest way to do that from a CEO, CFO standpoint is to look at your revenue and say, what portions of my revenue won't be disruptive without having a sales force at all, right? So I know that I'm going to get so many repairs parts that I'm going to have to ship out for my existing install base that need, broken wheels, broken tubes, broken engines, whatever the case may be, right? So if I'm a manufacturer, that's just a reality of my life. I know I'm going to get that spare parts business. I could stop selling and I'd still get that spare parts business for at least this year. So what part of that business do you already have locked in? Then what part of their business do you have relationships with customers where they are continuously buying from you? And this is up to, whatever you're selling, the company you work for, the products you make, the products you sell. But what products are just going to automatically go to that customer because that customer's you've kind of locked them in. They're a good customer. You still got to take care of them, but they're already buying from you. But then what part of your customers are like, I always have to sell, or what part of your revenue stream, I'm sorry, I always have to sell that revenue stream. I have to spend effort against that. Get a good idea of your business that can't go away just because you've been in business. That's that first part. The second part, business that probably isn't going to go away. And then look at the business that you actually have to drive daily activity on in order for it to happen. You have to new customers or expand those existing customers, right? So I like to break it up into those buckets. Gives you a good idea of where do I have to look, and then now I can start thinking about what is real and what can I actually achieve.
Sure, sure. And one pitfall or landmine to avoid in this process is to not consider attrition, right?
That's right.
Somebody's going to move, go out of business, get bought, have a life event in their family that means they can't work for 6 months. These things happen and they have dollar sign impacts on your sales, right? So
Right.
that's a strategy to avoid there, a tip to avoid. Another one is, on the fun side of this, I love dreaming a little bit when we're setting goals and saying, well, what customers do we absolutely want to add to our logos, right? The logos we're serving. And it's great to say, well, I would love, being a New York Yankees fan, I know I'm going to lose some viewers just on that right there.
You do know where you live, right?
I do. I'm in Cincinnati. It's a big red machine, and they're easy to like. But I know that I would like to sell product or services or solution, whatever discipline you're in, to that organization, just to say, hey, it would be really great, right? That'd be really cool, and I'd be able to pat myself on the back for a while. And if I got them, that would represent potentially a very large dollar figure, right? So you run the risk as a sales manager, a goal setter, of overstating your possibilities, right? In the same way you cannot consider attrition, you can also over consider possibilities of the best customer on earth kind of thinking and what they could do to your revenue. So avoiding those two potholes will actually do you more service than it will cause you headaches.
I agree 100%. And remember, we're going to have an episode in a couple of weeks on setting compensation commissions in your comp plan. And this topic tonight will tie into that topic in a couple of weeks when we actually do that, because how you're going to figure out where your revenue streams are coming from will start to dictate what kind of compensation plan you need to have for the upcoming year. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Agreed. And a spoiler alert, right? We've talked about this before. Every year has new sales goals in the same way that
every year should have a new compensation plan.
Boom, drive it home. That's one that'll hunt. I was actually having this conversation today with a guy that he was really taken by this. And I said, hey, you want to incentivize the goals you're trying to reach as an organization.
Right.
So there's your best practice there for setting sales objectives. Setting a sales objective at the organizational level means that you have to cascade or waterfall those same goals and objectives down to the level where somebody's doing the work to help you reach those, right?
Right.
If you just say, I want to enter a new market and don't assign quota to it or start working on relationships for it, it's really unlikely that you're going to get there. So
that's right.
Having a plan and then working it.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that. So a lot of our customers are smaller companies. They have new markets that they're always going after or thinking about going after on a regular basis. So when they go after those markets, they need to think about, now that we're planning ahead for next year, they need to think about, okay, so I'm going to dedicate 20%, 10%, maybe 100% of my sales force to going after this new thing, this new market that we haven't gone after, because maybe my stable business is just there. It's stable. So now I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to roll the dice. So what is that going to do? What's my upside for that? Worst case, what's my downside for that? So figure that out. And, what's that balance that I have to do with my sales force? Do I put 100% of my sales force out going after that new thing? A little scary. I probably don't think you and I would suggest that. But do I put 10% of my sales force going after that? And do I make a plan to make that happen?
Yes. And do I support that growth with marketing and resources? And because it's like every part of your business. If you're a CEO and you're thinking about how you're resourcing problems in your business, if your problem is revenue or growth or customer attrition, you need to resource that problem in a way that allows you to overcome it, not just keep it at bay.
That's right.
If we're just saying, hey, we're going to lose 10% of our accounts this year and we're just trying to replace 10, I mean, that's a very flat line. There's no reason to take that much risk in business to just break even year over year.
Yeah. And in that scenario where you think you're going to lose 10%, so you're going to try to catch that 10% up again. Well, that's not only is it flat line, but there's a lot of risk there, right? So if you're really thinking that you're going to lose 10% or 20% of your business because of attrition, then you need to start thinking about making that up plus, because the reality is we need to grow. We need to constantly be making our company bigger and more productive, more lucrative, and more valuable to our future shareholders, even our existing shareholders. So driving that conversation about, look, if we know we're going to lose 20% because we always lose 20%, okay, well, maybe we should address that 20% problem, but definitely let's figure out a plan that's going to replace that plus more. I would actually say, let's do both. Let's figure out how do we turn that 20% into 10, how do we turn it into 5%? But that's one of those challenges that you and I get pulled into all the time, is how do we make sure that those problems don't cause bigger problems in the future?
Completely agree. We've covered a lot of ground here, right? We've talked about a little bit about comp plans. We talked about attrition, setting appropriate goals, thinking about the longer view as well as the next year view. So for people like us, we get this question a lot. You and I talked about this offline. We get the question of, okay, smart sales guy, what do I do next? So let's bring this kind of under the umbrella here. What is the prescriptive and the appropriate or practical approach for somebody listening here going, I've got a sales goal setting challenge. How do I start eating this elephant?
Right. So let's just boil it down. Figure out where you need to go as a company in the future. Then figure out how this year is going to affect that future goal of where you want to be. And then continuously work backwards through the problem. Always make sure that you are setting your goals sufficiently high enough that they are going to achieve your company goal. So your sales goals, your sales team goals should be sufficiently high enough to achieve that, but not so high. And we really didn't talk about this, but we'll talk about it in a future episode. Not so high that your sales team goes, we can't do that. There's just no way. I give up today, right? I'm scared, right? So we're going to talk about that in a future episode, I have a feeling. And how do we not scare our salespeople away just because we gave them a goal that we thought we needed, but they can't think they can get.
Yeah. And I thought you made a really good point. So I'm going to make sure I hammer it home a little bit here. At the leadership level, whether you're working with a controller or a CFO, somebody in a leadership position that understands the finances, you've got a baseline, right? So the goal can never be below that. That's your minimum. You can't go into the red as a plan, right? So using that as a baseline, you understand that you've got that much of a need existing. Then you got a growth goal, right? So we've got what are we going to start with? Where are we trying to ascend? What are we trying to attain or keep or grow? And then what resources does it take? So beginning with the end in mind becomes really important. The number one thing I think Sean and I would say for anybody listening is don't wait till January or February to set next year's goals. Right?
Yeah.
This is a really busy time of year, and it's really easy to get caught up in holidays and family time and Thanksgiving, but you've got people in your businesses that are relying on you to sustain them. So this is a critical time.
Yeah,
It's
and
the beginning of Q4, and make sure you go into Q4 with a plan for executing a future planning exercise for all of next year.
that's exactly right. And you know what my statement is, Kevin? I want to hand, as a VP of sales, I want to hand my sales team their quota and what they're going to sell, what they have to achieve. I want to do that approximately December 1st. I want to get all of that out of the way. Plus, I want them to know that the money that they make now is better than the money they're probably going to make in January. So hurry up and get those orders in December, because you know what? An order now is better than an order later. It just is.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
This has
Sean,
been
this has
fun.
been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, so we are at quarter after. So we've actually gone through the process now of talking a little bit about this. We've taken up all of your 15 minutes, maybe a little couple over. This is a weekly episode that we are going to do. Kevin and I are going to try to get together, talk a little bit about some of our histories, talk a little bit about some of the things that we have learned over the years. I think together, and I'm not going to say it, but I will allude to the fact that we have over 50 years of sales experience between the two of us. That's a lot of sales experience. And there's some things that we want to share. And that's the reason we're doing this episode. That's the reason we're going to do all of these episodes. So hopefully you get value out of this. We really do want to hear from you, though. Please put a comment in this post. Ask us questions. Ask us things that we didn't cover. We'll try to expound on those things in a later episode. Send us a note. Kevin and I are both on LinkedIn a lot. So send us a note and drop us a question there. We're happy to do that. If you know us personally, you can drop us a note at our email addresses as well. We really do appreciate you being on, and we hope to catch you next week as you're driving home from work. Thank you, Kevin.
Happy selling. Take care.